The Sony ZV-E10 II at launch was the best camera for vloggers, lifestyle shooters, and even new filmmakers because it had the specs and features of a pro Sony camera, but with a lower price and beginner-friendly design. However, with new cameras coming out, is the ZV-E10 II still worth it, and how does it compare? Let's do a deep dive and find out. Also, I'll leave links down below with the best pricing on the ZV-E10 II. Now, let's get straight into what makes the ZV-E10 II such a great camera, and we'll also talk about the downsides. The Sony ZV-E10 II has the exact same sensor as the Sony FX30 and the Sony a6700. The Sony FX30 is a legit full-blown cinema camera, and the Sony a6700 is arguably Sony's best APS-C photography camera. So you get a 26 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is plenty of resolution and produces high quality photos and videos. On top of that, you get the same excellent dynamic range of 11.3 stops, which allows you to capture more light information, giving you a more professional look to your images and excellent flexibility when it comes to editing. And the sensor is spectacular in low and dim lighting situations, but the exact results will depend on your shooting mode. In S-Log3, you have a dual native ISO of 800 and 2500, but you can easily go as high as 6400 ISO in standard video mode or up to 10,000 ISO when shooting raw photos. And this feature makes the ZV-E10 II a very versatile camera for different shooting environments. And you can also use smaller and cheaper lights for cinematic shooting. And unsurprisingly, the autofocus is really good, but that's something Sony cameras are always good at. The autofocus is extremely accurate even with moving subject matter, and it also has AI detect for animal, people, and birds. And it also includes product showcase mode, where the focus snaps to the product and then back to your face. And the autofocus performance should be just about as good as the a6700, but it will be better than the older FX30. And for 99% of people, this autofocus will be perfect. Now, the best part about this camera isn't just the image quality and sensor, but rather how it captures the video and the workflow for editing. Because Sony has done a tremendous job making high quality and cinematic footage available for both beginners and serious shooters. But this is also where you see the downsides of this camera, and unfortunately, we have a few to talk about. The ZV-E10 II can capture 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second with over 2 hours of record time, but if you're in a super hot environment, it might overheat and you might get as little as 20 to 30 minutes, so keep that in mind. It is pretty typical for an entry-level camera like this, but just so you know. You can also do 4K at 60 frames per second for 2x slow motion with a tiny 10% crop, and compared to cameras at a similar price point like the Canon R50, R50V, the Nikon Z50, or the Fuji X-M5, they all have a much heavier crop in 4K 60. With the ZV-E10, you'll get about 25 minutes of runtime in 4K 60 if you're in ideal conditions. But if you're in a super hot environment, you might get as little as 11 minutes. So something to watch out for, but it's pretty typical for entry-level cameras. And one thing I love about the ZV-E10 II is that the footage is also downsampled from 6K, giving you the same detail and resolution as 6K, but in a much smaller and easier to edit 4K file. And this is something most entry-level cameras don't do. And if you shoot a lot of slow motion, you also have full HD with no crop at 60 and 120 frames per second, but this mode is not downsampled. But Sony takes it a step further and gives you several workflow options for getting to your end product. And there's something here for both beginners and serious shooters. First off, you have creative profiles that let you add a touch of style to your videos, and each profile is also customizable, so you can dial in your look exactly how you want it, and this is available for both photos and videos. And you also have cinematic vlog mode, which adds black bars to the top and bottom for a cinematic aspect ratio, and trust me, it does make it more cinematic, and you also have a customizable look on top of that. However, this is only available in 4K at 24 frames per second. Now, if you want to get the most out of the Sony ZV-E10 II and really use it like an FX30 cinema camera, you can also shoot in S-Log3 or the other cinema profiles available with 10-bit color, and this is going to give you the maximum dynamic range and color flexibility. Plus, you can also record at a very high bit rate of 250 to 600 megabits per second in XAVC-S, which means you capture more information, get a higher quality image with more flexibility in color grading. And you don't have to shoot an S-Log3 or a cinema profile to make use of the high data rates. You can still get the same benefits even if you're shooting standard or using creative profiles. Now, so far the ZV-E10 II sounds pretty great. So let's talk about the downsides. And there's two major things to talk about, with one kind of not being that bad. First is stabilization. The ZV-E10 II only has digital stabilization with no physical stabilization. And you would think a vlogging camera like this should have it, but unfortunately most cameras at this price point of any kind only have digital stabilization. And I'll be honest, it's kind of shaky and may not be ideal for some. Even with my big, strong, manly hands, I really can't keep the camera that steady. But you do have active stabilization, which is much steadier, but it comes with a pretty heavy crop, which zooms in your image, and I don't love that look, especially for vlogging. Alternatively, you do have the Sony Catalyst software that uses gyro data to stabilize the footage, but I find it really annoying to use a separate program for every single clip. For some people, it actually might make sense to upgrade to a more expensive Sony a6400 or an FX30 that do have physical in-body stabilization, or a cheap $300 gimbal. But for some, it might not matter at all. Now, the second downside is honestly a semi-downside, and that's how this camera does photos. The ZV-E10 on paper is a really good photo camera. It can do 11 frames per second, which is plenty fast for most action and sports. And even if you're doing long bursts of shooting, it can actually shoot up to 55 raw photos in a row, so you'll be just fine. The photos look excellent with tons of dynamic range and color flexibility, and you can absolutely create some stunning edits. However, here's the big hairy but. The ZV-E10 II doesn't have a physical shutter, which can cause a jello effect when you're whip panning the camera, or strobe lines with certain indoor lighting. But like I said, this is a semi-negative that won't affect everybody because most of us aren't going to whip pan our camera, and the strobe lines can easily be fixed by using a slower shutter speed. So it's something you should know about, but it probably won't affect you. And despite being the cheaper and more affordable model, the ZV-E10 II has phenomenal design, and in many ways, it's as good as the more expensive cameras. The body is super lightweight and literally fits in the palm of my hands, and it also comes in black or white if you care about that. And despite the small body, it still uses the large Pro-style battery that you find in the more expensive cameras, easily giving you all-day battery life. And this is something the entry-level cameras from Canon, Nikon, and Fuji don't do. Plus, it also comes with a great everyday kit lens, which is a 16 to 50mm lens, which is great for both wides and tight shots. And Sony has a really large selection of lenses available, including third-party options, so you can get the exact lens you need for your shooting style. I shot all of my cinematic tests with this camera with the new SIRUI Vision Primes, and I think they go really well with the ZV-E10 II because they're both super small and lightweight, and these lenses are also native E-mount. Plus, the lenses are t1.4, so great for low light and shallow depth of field. Now, I'm still testing these lenses, so this is not an endorsement. They might suck, but so far, they've been pretty good. And they're probably the best budget cinema lens option I've seen so far. As for the rest of the ZV-E10 II body, the button layout is very different than your traditional camera, but I actually find other brands copying this design because it's so easy to use. It has a simple toggle to switch between photo, videos, and slow motion, and two separate capture buttons for photo and video, plus a defocus button to instantly add more background blur to your shots. And a zoom rocker on the front for any power zoom lenses, and the kit lens is a power zoom. And it also has a built-in 3-capsule microphone for better in-camera audio. And this is actually audio from the camera right now. For the most part, it should sound pretty decent. But if you really want the best audio, I recommend an external microphone. And you can also plug in external microphones directly through the flash port, so no messy wires blocking your screen. And speaking of the screen, it's also a side articulating screen for self-recording, but also high angle and low angle shots. And it's 100% touch sensitive over everything in the camera, including touch autofocus. And the interface is so good, you could technically do everything through the screens instead of the buttons. Because it also has a customizable quick menu to access all of your major settings that you can also swipe away. So is the ZV-E10 II still worth it a year later? Why and how does it compare to the competition? I wrote this part of my script like 7 times. I had so much flowery and poetic language. But the simplest way to put it is if you want a premium product with all of the major features with nothing missing, you definitely want to get the ZV-E10 II. But if you want better stabilization, you definitely want to pick up the FX30, the a6700, or even the Lumix S9. These cameras are more expensive, and I still think the ZV-E10 II is a better deal for the money. Now, if you compare the ZV-E10 II to the other entry-level cameras from Fuji, Canon, Nikon, they're pretty much worse in every single way. Like 4K 60 has a bigger crop, the autofocus is worse, the low light is worse, but those cameras are significantly cheaper. So for some people, saving that money might make more sense. I still think the ZV-E10 II is a better deal. And I personally rather spend the extra $300, $400 and just get the best product that I'm going to keep for the next 4, 5, 7 years. So if you're serious about your video work and you want the best deal possible, the ZV-E10 II is definitely the way to go. And if you want the best deal on this camera, I'll leave links down below and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.